Good afternoon, everyone. It's what is it? It's 1:32 here in Melbourne, so it'll be reasonably late in the US and obviously in Europe if you are watching this. I've had a number of people that are asking me to do some editing with them, and I thought this last shoot that I did is a great one that I can just go through with you and discuss how I expose the image. And even I'll go through how I pose the girls and sort of talk about that. Well, there's girls and boys in this one. So I thought that I'd take you through this image. And I'll go through a sort of stack of them and just sort of go through my exposures and sort of explain what I'm doing. So this shoot that I did is a Deb shoot, and basically what it is, it's a group of, I think they're year 10 here, year 10 and 11 usually, girls and boys that do a debutante ball, which means they dress up almost looking like brides, and I'll show you how this looks in a minute, but they look almost like brides and grooms, and they do a whole night where they do dances and things like that, and it's very, very formal. And what happens here, some of them want to pay to have really nice photography done before the actual event starts. They do get photography done at the venue, but I don't do those. I'm really only interested in doing these ones where it's a bit more artistic, because the problem is at the venue, basically it's just in front of a screen and you just sort of shoot away, and they're not very artistic in the shooting. So I love doing these sort of things. So this was a full page shoot. All the girls paid me a lump sum. And then I'm just delivering all these images to them, and they can just basically do whatever they like with them. So it's a little bit different than when I do weddings or any other type of things, but it's similar in a way to shooting a wedding. So I'll take you through the actual shoot, and then I'll sort of talk to you too about how I've posed the girls, just so it might give you a bit of a hint about posing. And I'll talk to you too about some things that... Now, I had to do this really, really fast because I only had a little over an hour to do this whole shoot. So I had to move incredibly fast because there was 9 girls and 9 boys. And I did want to move to multiple locations around this beautiful venue, which is near me. It's called Amesbury Homestead, and it is really gorgeous. It's a really old homestead, and I did want to move them to multiple locations to sort of get them around. So the little things like when I'm looking at this first image that I'll discuss with you in a minute, and I'm a perfectionist in the fact that I do want it to look like art, but having said that, I still like the image to look correct. Now, I'm not talking about pixel peeping, I'm talking about just other things, and I'll mention that as we go through it. So please, if you want to ask some questions at any time, let me know too if you really think this is helpful, and I'll do this for you more if you do find that this is actually quite helpful to you as well. So let me switch over anyway to the computer, and we'll have a look. Oh, here's beautiful Kerry. Hang on, just say hello. Look at my darling wife. She's brought in a lovely coffee for me. Say hi, Kerry. You'll have to bend down.
Hi.
So Kerry's going to be helping me tomorrow, guys. Yeah, she's not staying, but she's going to be helping me tomorrow in this, hopefully not the wet shoot, eh? So we're hoping it's going to be,
showers, maybe.
not too bad. Thanks, Kez.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Now, let's go here. So this is the shoot that I want to basically go through with you. Now, there's going to be a number of girls here that we're using that are having the shoot, I should say. Like I said, fire away questions too, guys, if you want to actually see what's going on. Now, this was shot with the A9. I'll just move this over a little bit so you can see what I've done here. So this was shot with the A9. It's 1/800th of a second. f1.8, ISO 100, and it's using the 85mm Batis. And it would be the same if you were using the Sony 85 1.8, so it'd give you basically exactly the same result. So the thing here was, initially, I just got here, and then basically I just decided to shoot this natural light. The light was sort of varying a little bit all over the place, actually, but I decided to put them in this location where they were a little bit out of the in the sun, so that it was sort of a little bit of shade there. And then in the other images that I'll show you, I'll actually show you that I've brought the flash in as well. So you'll be looking at images that are natural light and also flash based as well. So this first image that I'm going to take you through, Let me just bring up the pen because I'll just discuss first how I posed her. So what I did was I asked her to lean against this pose, and you'll see that each girl I've given the same instructions to when they're looking at it. Let me just check that no one's asking questions yet. No, they're just talking about rain and stuff like that at the moment. Now, I asked her to put her shoulder against the wall. So this is an important thing that you can ask a girl to do is to put her shoulder basically against the wall, as you see here. Now remember, you're just seeing this straight out of the camera at this stage. The other thing too is that she must point her hip, excuse me, she must point her hip out. That will give them a nice shape through this area here. And that's the thing that you want to do. You want to give them that lovely curve that you're seeing through this point here. Therefore, this is all being pushed out. I'd also tried to make her face sort of align directly to me like there, but she's leaning gently against that flash area through here. Also, her leg, I did ask her because it also improves the shape. I asked her to have that front leg basically bent like that in front. And now you just can't see it because the dress is hiding that, but that will give you a guide about how I've asked her to pose in each case. And like I said, as we edit this, you'll sort of see it's going to come up really quite nice. A thing that bugs me basically with this straight away is the fingers. And this is where you've got to be so careful about how you pose things. Now, see, even I'll fall for these sort of things where I should have been aware of that. I really should have been aware that her fingers were going to be an issue there because I usually am very conscious of that, and it's just not good. Now, is the photo still fine? And yes, it will be, but it could be improved by letting her relax her fingers and having them long and relaxed. But you've just got to be careful that you don't tell them to, make them too straight. They should just be sort of relaxed a little bit. And that's one thing there that I noticed straight away that bugs me about this. But anyway, so let's start editing anyway, and we can have a look. So the first thing is I'm going to square this off because it's a little bit off in that corner, so I use the grid to sort of get it so that it's going to be basically square, and I might just cut that pipe off a little bit. So I'm going to leave it something like that. I might go a fraction more over. Okay, now that I've cropped this, and you can see that it's nice and straight, the idea was to have her leaning against this wall. Now I've wanted to make sure that I kept the detail in the highlights, and that's the reason why I chose that exposure that I did. I've allowed the shadows to go, and then I've made sure that I haven't got rid of any of the highlights through this area through here, because I want to keep that detail in there. That's the most important thing for me here, is to keep that detail. Is the exposure perfect? No, it's not, and I'll show you now how I'm going to adjust this. So the first thing that you have to do is I'm going to start using the exposure, the highlights, shadows, whites, and the blacks, and I'll probably play around a little bit with clarity and vibrance, and I'll explain where I use these in each case. But for instance, there's a difference between the shadows and the blacks. The main difference I can tell you here is that the shadows holds detail, the blacks will change it more uniform. The first thing I always change is the blacks exposure, then I'll work within that with the shadows, and I'll just do it to keep detail, and it'll make more sense as we do it, and I do a similar thing with the highlights. So it'll make more sense now as we do it. So you can just drag the blacks up until you sort of see the point where the detail is still able to be seen. Now there's a thing you can do too. You can hold the Option key down, and as you move this down, you'll see what happens here is that anything that basically is solid black like that has been completely filled, so you've lost everything that's in there. You should move the point until basically that just disappears. That's the point basically where the blacks then could be or should be. Then I'll grab the shadows and I'll boost the shadows up until you sort of see the detail in the shadow. Because remember, the shadows dialog box is the one that keeps detail. So I'm just going to move these between the two of them a little bit until I'm happy with the result that I'm actually getting there. So that's given me the shadow end. Now what I'm making sure here is that I've still got detail in the blacks, and basically I'm not clipping anything. Now I can do the same thing with the highlights. The first dialog box you'll move is the whites, And again, you can move that until you can see that the whites are actually clipping in. They're the opposite now. So as soon as they start to appear, that's the correct exposure. So I'm moving the whites until they just start to appear. Then I'm going to move the highlights the same way until that just disappears. And basically, I'll often do it by a visual amount looking at the actual image. I'm going to make sure that I keep all of the detail there. So now you can see that's basically what I've gone from, is looking at that. Basically, you can see there that's the original one, and then you can see here how it's now affected on the retouched one. And then again, I can then start to manipulate this just a touch if I want to by, say, having a fraction of exposure. Now, vibrance is a really good slider to use. Saturation, you've got to be very careful because saturation will change everything overall. Vibrance will try and protect skin tones. So you'll notice if I move it down, it just basically is altering everything and trying to protect skin tones. If you move it down too much, naturally it's going to affect it. But if you just boost it up a little bit, it's going to try and protect the skin tones, but then move the colors everywhere else. Now, once I've got that, those exposures basically are the same, this first one and this second one. So all I'll do is I'll hold the shift key down, I'll go to the second image, and I'll just say sync. And that will sync those settings to both images so that they're now both the same. So that's how I'll do basically going through that, and then we'll keep going and I'll show you now the next image, and then we'll skip to another one where we can sort of see it as well. So what I've done here is I've taken one fairly far away, and then I've used the same lens and I've moved in a little bit closer to do basically a head and shoulders. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab the blacks up a little bit here. I'm going to move the shadows up until I'm happy with the look of the image. And then I'm going to use the whites until they're just starting to clip, and you can see it there, they're just starting to clip. And I'm just going to drop it then down just a touch. And again, I can then move the vibrance up and add a little bit of clarity in the image. I don't want to have heaps. You've got to be careful how much clarity you actually add. And again, there's two images there that basically look the same. Let me just move this so you can see. There's two images that are the same, so I'm just going to click on both and then say sync. Now, if you've taken lots of images and all of those exposures are exactly the same, well, then you can do them all in one go by using just sync, and that's a great way of actually making it so that all of the images are done fairly quickly. And then basically I'll just sort of tweak them until I'm sort of happy with, the amount that I've actually got in it, and and I'm really quite happy with how they're actually looking. I think they're going to look quite nice. Yep, they're going to be beautiful. So you can see it's lovely and sharp, gorgeous. Again, these aren't going to have high-end retouching because they haven't paid for that. They've paid for me to deliver these images basically as you're sort of seeing them now. But again, I'm really happy with that, and I think, they're beautiful. Now, what I did for the next shoot was I just brought the girl's partner in, so you can sort of see here that I've had the guy stand at the other side. The girl's still sitting in that same position, and the guy's sort of leaning in, looking directly at me. The next shot over here is I've had them looking at each other. So let's just edit this one, and then we'll move to the next image. So I'm going to use the blacks first till I get a nice look. Then move the shadow to keep detail up as much as I can. Move the whites until I see some clipping, and then drag that back in the highlights. And I'm happy with that. Now, I probably will crop it a little bit, but I'll see that later. Again, here, I'll click on the next one, and I'm just going to go previous, and you'll see basically that that's the same result where they're now just looking at each other. Then I basically had the boy on his own, so we'll do the same thing here. I'm just going to grab the blacks up, have the shadows until I get the look that I like. I might even add a fraction of exposure on this one. And then bring up the whites until I see that clipping in the shirt, and then reduce the highlights down. And again, I'll just crop this so that it's basically straight. I have to leave a bit of that background in. And again, this is going to have the same exposure. I could try previous because it should basically be the same exposure, which it is. And I'm just going to bring that down just a touch in exposure. And I'm quite happy with that. I'm quite comfortable. Now, I'm doing this with each girl. So I won't do the same girl now because the same pose, because I'll go on to the next pose so that you can see basically what we're doing. But you can see here that I've gone through the same system with each pose that we've done. And they should all be the same exposure. But like I said, I'll move on until we get the next pose coming through. So I'll skip all of these. Now, sometimes these aren't girlfriend, boyfriend. Sometimes they're just friends. Sometimes they are boyfriend and girlfriend. If they are boyfriend and girlfriend, I will pose them a little bit differently, and you'll see that as we go through the next exercise, the next pose that we move along with. So we'll keep going until we get to the next couple of poses, I should say. All right, so the next pose, basically, that I'm going to show you is we'll go through, I'll choose a different girl. Let's have a look. Just try to see which one I'll go for. Now, it's going to be the same exercise with all of them. Well, let's try this one. All right, so what I've asked them to do, here you can see that I've asked them to walk down a pathway. And basically I'm still using the 85mm here. It's 1/4000th of a second. I'm on f1.8 ISO 100. There's a flash that is off camera, and it's actually sitting just sort of off camera around about here on a light stand, because I was working on my own doing this. It had a grid on it. Well, it was actually level, a fraction over her head, so it was up here somewhere. It had a grid on, and therefore it's just lighting her up, and you're not getting spill that's coming all around the bottom. Just let me check too and see if there's any questions, because I'll just see if there's anything that you want to know before we move on. Hey, David, hope all is well. Most people are just saying hi. Long Island Hillbilly said, David, do you set camera with negative exposure comp? No, I shoot, well, I just shoot manual. So I'm not even using it in auto. I'm just shooting manual here and making sure that I'm just not clipping the highlights. That's the way that I actually expose all of these. So whenever I expose, I've exposed so that I'm not clipping the highlights. This is the beauty of using the Sony system as well, because you get the view in the viewfinder. I don't even have to use the EVF because I'm confident I usually have the blinkies showing, that it'll actually show if it's flashing, the highlights have been clipped, and then I'll move it until that's just disappeared, and I'll go a fraction further than that because I don't like any blinkies at all. So I'm not worried about the shadow because I know straight away that I can bring those shadows back up later on in post, which you'll see is what I'm actually doing. So that's the way I'm tending to work with these. I'm always adjusting for the highlights and then pulling the shadows up. So, that's the way that I've found that it works the best it can be. Here, though, they were quite dark without the flash, and that's the reason why I've added the flash now. So I'm using the Pro Photo here, the B1, and I'm lighting them up. So I've taken an ambient exposure in the beginning, so I've made sure that I'm roughly happy with my ambient, and then I've added flash to fill them in. And I'm going to bring up those background tones a little bit with flash later on, because you've got to understand too that when I've exposed for the ambient here, I've worried about this sort of stuff that's in the background because I didn't want to lose that. So that's where I've basically exposed for, and I've made sure that when I've added the flash that I'm not clipping her dress or any of the whites. Because remember, your detail is in that dress. That's what I've made sure that I didn't overexpose for. So once I've got the correct ambient exposure that I've got, I've used TTL on the flash to get a rough base exposure. I then immediately turn the flash on to manual and then just manipulate the flash until I get the correct result. And it only usually takes, just let me put a thing on this so I know which one we're going to do, but it only takes a couple of exposures to work that out. Now you'll see if I come down early on, where I'm checking exposures, you'll see, actually the sun came out. That was the problem here, the sun came out. But I would normally check exposure in the beginning. You can see here that's probably an ambient exposure, and then the next couple later I'm going to start adding flash. That that may have even been the flash on actually, and then I'll adjust the flash down until it gets to the correct exposure where I'm happy with it. So that's the way it works, and it usually only takes me a couple of shots to get that correct. It doesn't take long at all. So that's what I'm actually working on here, is getting the ambient exposure correct to start with, then adding flash in TTL, going to manual, and then starting to use the flash on that. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm just checking too if there's any other questions. So yes, so I'm not using negative exposure compensation. You could if you were shooting with using your aperture mode, you would use negative compensation on that. But I'm shooting manual, and it would, if you looked in the viewfinder, it would go minus in the actual viewfinder, yes. So yeah. Anyway, so let's edit this image. So basically, I've asked her to stand down this walkway, and again, I like the compression that it's given. I have asked her to turn more side on, so I have turned the shoulders through here. I've asked her to put the back shoulder away, which also then makes sure that she's not so front on. You've got to try and remember that with a girl. Now, not all girls will do that. If some girls will want to be more front on, and you've got to remember that's a more powerful pose, which is often used for males. But with girls particularly, I like to put them a little bit on the side. And again, she's put the fingers really nice because she has had them nice and long. So now we'll go about checking the exposure on this. So basically, I'm going to go through the same thing as I did before. I'm going to bring the blacks up so that you can see. I'm just going to move that. And again, if we hold the Option key down, basically, I'm going to do it just until that disappears, which is about there. Now I'm going to use the shadows just to make sure that I'm still getting detail in the background. And with the whites, I'm going to expose that just until I see that clipping, which you can see there coming in the red. Notice that. I'm just going to get that until it clips and then drop the highlights back down. Now here, I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance to add a little bit of color. And I'll also add a little bit of clarity. But there's another thing that I want to do with this as well. Because it's got these lovely greens that are sort of sitting around, I always love pushing the greens up. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to grab the HSL, and I'm going to grab the greens, and I'm going to push those up a little bit to the green area. Now again, you could do this with other colors if you wanted to, but now I'm really actually quite happy with this. I think it's actually looking lovely in the background. She's separated nicely now from the background. I've kept all detail basically in her dress, so there's nothing that's lost in any of her dress. That's all still there. The detail is all still there. And that's the important thing for me. And it has that lovely soft rendering that's sort of coming out of here. Now, I could crop this right in if I wanted to. I could also crop this down, but I'm going to leave that for them to decide. But I could basically, come in and then crop this down quite substantially and change it like that if I wanted to. But again, they're going to have that ability to do that if they want to crop these down later on. But then now that I've got that exposure, I can basically grab all of these ones with the girls and I can just go sync, and then they'll all be basically the same exposure. Now, to show you a couple of different things here, I've asked her to face forward in a couple of them. Then I've asked her to start walking towards me. So you can see there that she's actually walking towards me. I think I'm going to crop these actually because I think they look nicer cropped. So I'm going to bring it in here. And then I'll sync them. Now you can choose when you sync to whatever you want to do. You could take off crop if you didn't actually want that to actually happen, but I'm going to go sync and then have each one basically showing the same thing. You may just have to change the crop just a little bit. You can see here that I'm just going to move her over just a touch. So again, with these, I've asked her to face away from me, and then she's basically walking towards me. I have asked her, and this is one thing that you've got to be very careful of here, is that you make sure they keep their chin up, because they will have a natural tendency to look down, and that looks really bad actually for these type of results. So what I've asked them to do is to make sure that they keep their chin up when they're walking, and I'm really happy with how the image looks. The next one, they've brought their partners in, and again the exposure is going to be the same as it was previously, so I'm just going to grab that and we'll come to the end and I'll just try syncing it and just see how they go. I think you're going to find, because the exposure is now in manual and the flash was set manual, I'm going to be able to keep these images the same for all of them. Let me just go to develop. So you can see here I've just asked them to cuddle around, then they're looking towards each other. I'm just going to pull these down just a touch down there. I like them more sort of down a little bit. I've asked them to look at each other. If they are actually a couple, I've said have a kiss. Their parents were there, so they knew what was going on, and I've asked them if they would like to have a kiss, and they did. And here you can just sort of see that they're facing one another and looking into each other as well, which is really nice as well. But you can see that that's beautiful. Now that's just exposing with one flash. They've been separated lovely from that background, so I'm really happy with that. And again here, I've asked them to, I'm going to have to change the cropping a little bit here. I've asked them here to walk towards me looking at each other, because I do always like that. Now you can see there's a little bit of clipping going on in here, so I'm going to drag that highlight down just a touch. And again, I'll just say previous because it'll have a similar look to the other one. I might even bring that cropping up just a touch. So again, you can see these, and I'm really happy with how these results look. I think they look actually beautiful, and this is why I was saying to you that they tend to look very similar to like wedding type images. Just let me check there's no more questions directly related to this. Not yet, so that's fine. All right, so let's go to the next area that I actually did, because the poses are all the same between each area. I won't bore you with going through all of those. So we'll have a look at this one. So here, I'll go to a different girl so you can see. So in case if they watch, they can see that it's different girls. Let me have a look. All right, so let's have a look at this. So what I've done here is I've got, now there was a party going on in the background. There was nothing I could do about that, so I've had to basically keep that as actually as it is. But looking at this image, the sun itself is coming this way, and it was about 12 o'clock. So I was having to really fight against the sun here. So that was an issue. So I was using high-speed sync in this case. But I've tried to balance her off as good with the lighting as what she was being hit with the background. Now you can see that has given her separation from her hair though, which is actually quite nice. So even though we're dealing with how harsh this sun is, and you can see it was almost directly overhead, because if you look, that's her shadow. So that's giving you an idea about how much sun was being affected here. So again, at the beginning here, I balanced for the ambient again. So I basically balanced the exposure so that I kept all of this, and I didn't blow any of this detail out for any of that area. Now she was, if the flash was off, she would have been very underexposed. She would have been very, very dark. So basically, if the flash was off, well, I'll bring this down just so you can sort of see what would have happened. If the flash was off, you know, you would have had this type of effect. It would have been basically like that. Now, like I said, I've exposed for the ambient. Then I've used the same thing as I did before. What I'm using here is 1/4000th of a second. I'm using f1.8, ISO 100, and I'm using the 85mm Batis at 1.8, and I'm using the Sony A9. Then I've added the fill. So again, I'm just using the ProPhoto B1, but this time I didn't use a grid at all. I'll just grab you the thing I used. I think I've got it in here. So what I used, now the last shot that you saw, the last one that you saw, I used a grid with a, it was a 2-foot octa, and I had a grid inside that because I was in that shadow area and I didn't want to light up the background. Now because I'm using high-speed sync now, and it's such a powerful light that was hitting them, I had to really overpower the sun to give her that separation from the background basically. So I use this on the ProPhoto B1. Now this is the wide zoom. Now this gives about an extra stop of power on the ProPhoto 500 watt units. Now because I've got that on there with no diffusion, it is a very hard light, but in this situation I knew that that's what I needed to give her that separation from that background. So I'm using this on the actual light, and it really gave a gorgeous result. Like, this is straight out of camera. So basically, after I've edited the girls individually, I've added, and I may go, no, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, okay, so what I've done now is I've brought the partner in, and you can see that basically if we're looking at this, I'm going to have to adjust the exposure a little bit here because his suit is so very, very dark. So I'm going to have to open up the shadows on this a little bit and the blacks to open up that shadow area that you can see detail in his suit. And again, I'm just going to bring up the highlights just a touch. So now I'm quite happy with how that looks. And again, I'm going to add clarity just to give it a little bit of sharpness, and then add some vibrance. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to grab the green and just add a little bit of greens in those sections. So basically that's what I'll do with the couples, and you can see there that they're cuddling into each other, and I'm just going to then sync all of these so that they're basically the same. So I'll go to here and synchronize those. And I think I won't even crop those because I think I like the way the image looks. Now you can see that I'm having them look directly at me. Then they're actually starting to look at the flash there. And then they're having a kiss. Now there is one thing that I notice here that I would fix if I was doing this again. Like I said, if Kerry was with me, I would be, because I was working on my own, I only had the hour to get through this, I had to be very fast. Because that flash is sitting on the side over here, you can see that it's an issue with his face there, that there's a shadow that's caused. I should have moved him a fraction forward and then that would have been eliminated. And that's one thing that you've got to be very careful of here. Now there's enough images in this that I'm happy that they're going to love them. But just so you know, next time, yeah, I haven't got the stubby here, I'm drinking coffee actually. Next time I would have moved him a fraction forward, therefore that shadow that she's casting wouldn't have been there. And they're things that you've got to try and look out for when you're working on your own. And that's why normally I don't work on my own. But let me just come back here. Like I said, again, that's nice. They're both looking at each other and there they're having a kiss. And like I said, I went through that with multiple girls as well. Now I'll take you through this one here that, let me reset these so that I can take you through that again. Like I said, with this one, and I'll just resync it all so they go back to normal. Okay, so with this one, I had to make a judgment here in exposure because basically the light was coming in and out, and you can see here how much difference has happened because the sun came out quickly. So I had to basically do an exposure before I did this to allow for the sun, because I was going to have them spin. I wanted to basically do it really fast, so I did an exposure that would keep the highlights in case if she span into the sun. So basically here, I'm just going to edit this exposure to bring it up. So I'm just going to bring her up a little bit and then drag that highlight back down to keep the detail. This is where I was saying earlier that it's a little bit blue. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the temperature slider over here and I'm going to grab it a little bit over towards the yellow area, which has now fixed that a little bit. You've just got to judge the difference between her and her hair if the body, that it doesn't start to go too yellow. So I'm quite happy with that. Again, I'm just going to open up the shadows a little bit, and I might even close the blacks down to give a little bit of contrast in there. And I'm really quite happy with that. Now, because the exposure is pretty well, like I said, the same now, I can then go to all of these and use the same exposure, and I'll just show you basically then what happened. And then I can just adjust ones that are a little bit brighter. So again here, I've asked her, this was just to get the back of the dress, the detail in her dress. Then I've asked them to spin around, and you can see that she's sort of just spinning around here. I'm just going to drop the highlights back just a touch. And basically I've just captured a whole stack of them spinning here. And this is the beauty of when you're starting to use the A9, that, you know, she's just spinning all around. And again, I did this with multiple different shots and different girls, and I've got some lovely shots out of this that I'm really happy with, and I think they'll love them when they see them. You know, and I think they're really pretty. So then I decided after that that they do group shots, and I'll show you how I set these up. So what I did here was, the problem was I had to there was two parties going on. There was a big party that was going on over this section, and there was a massive one going over in this section. So I had to basically make a decision where I was going to do it. They wanted to be in front of the house. So I've stuck them in that area there, and I've got two Profoto units here. I've got one that's sort of out this side over here and one that's over this side here, just lighting them up a little bit, trying to balance the exposure. And I knew that basically when I took the ambient exposure here that I wanted to keep all the detail in the sky. So I wanted to make sure I didn't blow out any of that detail in the sky. You can also see we had no option because the group was so big that some of them were going to be in sun, so I also had to watch that as well. So I've had to try and balance the exposure all over the place on this unit. So the ambient exposure was really important. And after that, I just did an exposure, adding it with flash. And again, all I'm going to do here is start to manipulate this image by opening up the blacks and also the shadows. And then I'm going to grab the highlights and drop the highlights a little bit. And I may even increase the exposure a little bit too, but just a touch. Just make sure nothing's clipping. And I'm probably happy around about there. And again, I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to these image, a little bit of vibrance, and then I'm basically just going to go sync to all of them. Now you can see here what's happened was that this was the original image, and then basically when I've retouched it in Photoshop, because I wanted to do a retouching on this in Photoshop, I have taken this to another level because I wanted to show this as their featured images on Facebook. So I have done a little bit of retouching. I also didn't like the drain sitting where it was, so I've retouched that out. So that sort of shows you where you can take it to if you wanted to take it just that little bit further. I mean, I think this probably could do with being a little bit brighter and drop the highlights and the whites just a touch. And again, I would crop that so it was a little bit top and bottom, a little bit tighter through that image. And all through these images, basically I'm asking them just to do different ways of cuddling in, play around, have a bit of fun, lean into each other this way. So again, I'm just having them lean into each other. And it's all just to basically have a little bit of fun with them. And that's what I love about doing this. And again, let me just sync that and that one just so that they're both the same. And again, you can see there that that's one where I've edited as well. This one here, I've asked them then to all sit down. So this was just a test exposure. So they are all just playing around. And again, I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be altering the exposure until I'm sort of happy with it. Pull down the highlights just a touch. And then add a bit of detail in the shadows, a bit of clarity and a bit of vibrance. And then I'm going to sync those images. And again, this was one of the other images that I got them to have a little bit of fun on. And you can see here that when I've taken that into Photoshop later on and edited it, it's given a really cute look with all the girls having a bit of fun. And a little bit later on, I've showed their shoes, which is here. And again, I'm going to expose this up a little bit, bring the exposure up, drop that highlights back down a bit, add a little bit of shadow, clarity, and vibrance. And then the boys basically are just doing the similar thing. Again, you can sort of see it here that I want to bring up the exposure just a touch, have some shadows opened up, bring the blacks just down a touch, and I'm quite happy with that. Highlights I might bring down a bit too, just so you get see what happens, you get the detail in the sky because I've exposed for the ambient exposure. And then I've just done one here, which I'll show you, which was edited in Photoshop, which was just done like that. And again, I'm just going to take the highlights down. You can sort of see where they're all having a little bit of fun. Let me just go back to questions here. Michael saying, nice, beautiful, classic pictures, David. Thanks, Tony. Michael, I mean. Nice shoes. I know they were really funny how the type of shoes that they actually put on. If I had the money, I went Sony. Should I have went Sigma? I had the money until I went Sony. Should have went Sigma. Laugh out loud. So that's it, guys. I mean, I just wanted to take you through that. Like I said, I think I'll download that image in a minute when it's processed and take out that bit where it wasn't working there. I'll just edit it and then repost it back up. Let me know whether you thought that was useful to see me do that. If you did like it, I'll do that in some other things for you, just so you can sort of see, whether you thought that was useful. It's funny, the shoes people now wear in weddings. Yeah, I know. Well, I've never seen them in weddings wear that sort of shoes, though, but I really did like it. It was really cute, actually. And because these dresses went right down to the ground and they were going to be dancing in these later on, I thought it was really cute. Most of the girls usually that do these debs have had quite formal shoes. This was the first one where I've seen them wear these type of shoes, and it was really quite cute. But just make sure if you do ever do this, like I said, have a lot of fun with them. Make it so that the guys are really enjoying themselves, and the girls are just having a bit of fun there as well. And then you'll get a lot of work if you do this type of stuff and then just share it. Like I said, these ones I just showed you here have been edited in Photoshop. All the others are only going to be edited as I showed you in Lightroom, because that's good enough for what I'm going to give them. Clearly, though, some of them probably will come back to me and ask for them to be edited to this extent, because you're sort of seeing the difference, from this to this, or it was actually that one to that one. Let me just adjust this so you can sort of see the exposure difference. I'm going to bring the shadows up, highlights just down a little bit, clarity, a little bit of vibrance. Let me crop this just so it's a similar crop. And again, if you look here, that drain, I should have moved them, and this is the thing. I always look back later on and say, Kerry went crook at me because she saw that drain there, and I really should have moved them. But you can sort of see here that I retouched it out. I got rid of it. So that sort of gives you an idea about the skin has been lightened. Now, the issue here, I'm still happy with this, but when I've taken it to Photoshop, I've then done selective lightening of skin and stuff like that, so it's lightened their faces off just a little bit more. Scott said the angry photographer just did a video. He said Sigma lenses are crap. Oh, God, that's funny. Michael said in Los Angeles, that's all they wear now. Oh, that's interesting. Well, that hasn't taken off here. Definitely not for weddings, though, that's for sure. Rui said, sorry, I'm late joining. Can you repeat everything you've just said? Yeah, well, you can watch it live. You can watch it when I post this, so you'll see it. I've got to take it down, though, as soon as it's actually processed, because I've got to delete a bit that was in through there that I had the wrong thing up. Sorry, I'm joining there. You said that. Rick said, I will be shooting my first wedding. Can you suggest somewhere online I can get an acceptable contract? You just have to search, Rick. Basically, I use ShootQ, but that's a site that I pay for, and I am going to take you all through that. It's just that they're changing their site to a new model that's coming up. But I've bought the contracts through them, and that's my whole studio goes through this software, which is amazing. But I'll take you through that and show you how that works soon. But you could shoot it online. But just make sure, don't use it just directly offline. You've got to then make it so that it works for your scenario that you're doing. So you would have to get a lawyer or someone to check it and make sure it's right. What else have we got? Gerald said, go back, and I asked shutter speed question. Oh, did you, Gerald? What was it? Gerald, what was the shutter speed for the ladies twirling their dress? Okay, I'll have a look. Let me get one. Which one was I doing? These. The shutter speed, I'll look at the one I've edited for you. The shutter speed is 3200. So I'll just bring it over so you can see the actual settings there. So it's the A9, 3200, 1.8 ISO 100, and it's the 85mm. And I was shooting it on high, so I was getting 15 frames per second. So that's the beauty of when you're shooting these things, that you can get that multiple shots where they're moving around, and it's just beautiful. If I bring the exposure up a little bit, I'll drop the highlights down, shadows up a touch. It's gorgeous because it has frozen it. So 1/3200th is easy enough to freeze that setting. So you're getting the lovely view of that. And they're all dead sharp. Like I said, the A9 particularly, the A7 III would be very similar. Just nails exposure each time they do it, And it's just gorgeous because you can get all these lovely images with movement in them, and it really is lovely to do that. But yeah, it's 1/32,000. That's why, too, I always shoot in manual, because if you're shooting aperture, everything can change, and I don't like that at all. I suppose you could shoot in shutter priority and set it that way, but I always shoot manual, and that's the way it works. And I was shooting 1/3200 at 1.8. That's about it, I think. All right, guys. Anyway, so I'll pop up. I'm doing a wedding tomorrow, so obviously I can't share anything tomorrow, but I will share some stuff next week. Let me know down below too whether you think this is useful for you. Please give me a thumbs up if you can. I'd love you to do that. It does get this video shared around, and I'll see you all again soon for the next video. Join our group. Here we've got questions, like Altric's asking a question at the moment. I can't answer him because I'm here live, but we're having competitions and everything in here. I'll put the link down below. It's really starting to take off, this site now. It's very positive. You can share anything you like on there about your business, your Instagram feeds, YouTube videos. The only thing you can't do is broadcast live to it. But join us on there, because it's a great place to have you communicating with all of us. There's weekly competitions where the winner basically gets to be put in the header up here. And I've got a really exciting one that I'm going to do for next week. So please join us on that page. Like I said, I will put the link down below so you can join us there if you haven't joined us so far. It's growing very, very fast. I've had another 28 members since yesterday, so it's doing really, really well. But yeah, please join us there.